Chapter 1. Professor Artemis Wolfbane commanded attention from the moment he strode into the classroom. Standing well over 6 feet tall, his broad shoulders and muscles strained against the confines of his tweed jacket. His face was chiseled to perfection, a strong jaw shadowed with perpetual stubble, high cheekbones, and a straight nose that spoke of aristocratic heritage. Dark waves of hair fell past his collar, occasionally prompting him to rake long, strong fingers through the untamed locks during lectures. The fundamental principle of light magic, he said, his large hands demonstrating with elegant precision, lies not in forcing change, but in understanding the inherent nature of what you wish to illuminate. Agatha Ravenscroft wasn't listening. At 36 years old, she was too busy watching a bead of sweat travel down the column of his throat and disappear beneath his collar. Her quill pen dangled forgotten between her fingers, dripping ink onto her notebook where she'd been doodling his name surrounded by hearts. She shifted in her seat, acutely aware of how out of place she was among the Academy's young students. Miss Ravenscroft, Professor Wolfbane's voice cut through her daydream. Perhaps you could demonstrate for the class. All eyes turned to her. Heat flooded her cheeks as she realized she had no idea what he'd been asking. This was precisely why she was here. Her magic had manifested 20 years late on her 36th birthday, an event that had involved 7 fire trucks, a hazmat team, and an urgent visit from the Council of Magical Education. She was deemed too dangerous to remain in the outside world until she learned to control her abilities, which meant 6 years confined to Nightbrook Academy for magical teens. 6 years of being trapped with the most gorgeous man she'd ever laid eyes on, who insisted on treating her with professional detachment, despite her best efforts. I'm afraid I wasn't paying attention, Professor. Agatha straightened her posture and met his gaze. Perhaps you could give me a private demonstration after class. A few snickers rippled through the classroom as Professor Wolfbane sighed, a sound Agatha had grown quite familiar with over the months. Miss Ravenscroft, please see me after class. His tone made it clear that it wasn't for the reason she hoped. A thrill shot through her nonetheless. Another chance to be alone with him. Another opportunity to make him see her as the woman she was, not just another student. With pleasure, Professor Wolfbane, she purred, ignoring the reactions of those around her. He turned back to the blackboard, but not before she caught the slight flush spreading across his cheeks. That blush told her everything she needed to know. He wanted her to, despite his protests, and one way or another, Artemis Wolfbane would be hers. When the last bell tolled across the academy grounds, signaling the end of classes for the day, Agatha took her time gathering her things. Unlike the younger students who rushed out, eager for their afternoon freedom, she relaxed back in her chair, watching as the room emptied until only she and the professor remained. Miss Ravenscroft. Professor Wolfbane's voice pulled her from her thoughts. He stood by his desk, organizing magical scrolls, his powerful forearms exposed where he'd rolled up his sleeves. I believe we had an appointment. Agatha rose from her seat, smoothing down her fitted skirt. Yes, Professor, she said, making her way to the front of the classroom. Her heels, a small victory in her battle against this prison, clicked against the wooden floorboards. I'm all yours. This is the 3rd time this week you've disrupted my class with inappropriate comments, he said sternly. Your behavior is becoming a problem. Agatha didn't bother taking the seat he gestured to, Instead, she perched on the edge of his desk, crossing her legs. The only problem I see is how we're wasting time pretending there isn't something between us. There is nothing between us, except a professional relationship, he stated firmly, though his eyes briefly betrayed him with a quick downward glance before returning resolutely to her face. You are my student. I am a 36-year-old woman who didn't ask to be here, and you're the only man under 60 for miles. Can you blame me for trying? This isn't appropriate, he sighed, sounding almost bored with the routine they'd established over the past months. We've had this conversation before. And we'll have it again, she winked, until you stop fighting the inevitable. There is nothing inevitable about it, Miss Ravenscroft. Now, if you don't mind, I have papers to grade. You can't avoid me forever, Artemis. She slid off his desk, pleased with how flustered he'd become. We're both trapped in this place, both outsiders. Don't you get lonely? Something flashed in his eyes, something dark and dangerous that made her heart race. We all have our reasons for being here, he said quietly, and our ways of coping. She stepped closer, sensing an opening. I could show you my way of coping. His jaw tightened. For a moment, just a moment, she thought he might give in, might close the small distance between them and satisfy the hunger that had been building between her legs. But instead, he stepped back, erecting a wall between them. Good evening, Miss Ravenscroft. The dismissal was clear, but Agatha wasn't discouraged. She'd felt the tension in his body, could see the war raging in his expression. One of these days, Professor, she said as she paused at the classroom door. Just you wait. His only response was another weary sigh. Agatha trudged through the darkening grounds toward her accommodation, an abandoned garden shed at the edge of the academy. When she'd flatly refused to sleep in the dormitory with a dozen giggling teenagers, the headmistress had offered this as the only alternative. The wooden structure came into view as she rounded the herb garden. Dilapidated and forgotten, it sat in the shadow of ancient oak trees, halfway between the academy and the towering mountain beyond. Agatha pushed open the creaking door and dumped her books on the floor. The inside was small but entirely hers. A narrow bed tucked against one wall, a worn desk beneath the single window, and a trunk containing her few possessions. Dried herbs hung from the rafters, some for magical purposes, others simply to mask the lingering scent of fertilizer and garden tools. Home sweet home, she muttered, lighting the oil lamp on her desk. The warm glow filled the small space, casting long shadows across the rough wooden walls. She changed out of her uniform, hanging it carefully on a hook beside her bed, and slipped into her lace nightgown. Settling onto her bed, Agatha pulled out a leather-bound notebook. She flipped past pages filled with messy handwriting, until she reached her favorite section. Freedom agenda, everything to do after escaping this magical prison. Let's see, she murmured, tapping her quill against her lips. She wrote, death scroll on my phone for 36 hours. Eat a proper meal that doesn't taste like it was cooked in the Middle Ages. Sleep for 3 days straight in a king-sized bed with memory foam. Go dancing at a club where everyone is at least 18. Master enough fire magic to burn this place to the ground after graduation. The list had started as a way to cope with her frustration, but had evolved into a roadmap for her future. A reminder that this imprisonment wasn't forever. Hours passed as she worked on her escape plans, the moon rising outside her window. A noise from outside made her pause. A howl, distant but distinct, echoed through the night. Wolves in the forest weren't uncommon, but something about this sound made the hair on the back of her neck stand up. It seemed closer than usual. Agatha moved to the window, wiping away condensation to peer out into the moonlit grounds. A large shape emerged from the trees, padding silently across the moonlit grass. Too big to be a normal wolf, its silver-streaked dark fur gleaming in the moonlight. Agatha's breath caught in her throat. It stopped directly outside, massive head tilting up as though sensing her presence. In the moonlight, its eyes gleamed silver. Eyes that she had been studying intensely for months. "Artemis," she whispered against the glass. For a long moment, neither moved. The werewolf's silver gaze remained fixed on her window, his massive form motionless in the moonlight. Then, slowly, he padded toward her door. Agatha's heart hammered in her chest. Werewolves were dangerous, unpredictable, driven by primal instincts during the full moon. Some retained their human consciousness, others became entirely beast. Which was Professor Wolfbane? She should reinforce her protection charms. She should hide. She should, at the very least, call for help. But she did none of these things. Instead, she flung the door wide open. Her pulse thundered as the cool night air swept into the shed, carrying with it the scent of forest and something dark. The werewolf just stood beyond her threshold. He was magnificent, dangerous and untamed in a way that made her blood sing with anticipation. Her mouth watered and a thrill shot down her spine. Finally, she breathed, stepping back to let him enter. "I was beginning to think that you'd never stop fighting this." The wolf's lips pulled back slightly, revealing sharp canines that gleamed in the firelight. A low growl rumbled from his chest, not threatening but hungry. His silver eyes raked over her silk nightgown with unmistakable desire. The same heat she'd been trying to kindle in his human form for months. Without hesitation, Agatha reached for him, her fingers sinking into the thick fur at his neck. "God, you're even more beautiful than I imagined," she whispered, pulling him closer. "I've dreamed about this, about seeing all of you." The werewolf moved with predatory grace, crowding into her space until she was pressed back against the doorframe. His massive head lowered, his breath ghosting over her throat as he inhaled deeply, drinking in her scent with a rumbling sound of approval. "Yes," she gasped, tilting her head back to expose more of her neck. "Do it, Artemis." The autumn sun filtered through the tall arched windows of the magical classroom, casting long golden rectangles across the worn wooden floor. Agatha Ravenscroft sat in her customary seat at the back of the room, her uniform doing nothing to conceal her 8-month pregnant belly. Professor Artemis Wolfbane stood at the front of the classroom, back to the class as he lectured on the principles of elemental magic. His silver eyes swept across the room, acknowledging raised hands, nodding at the correct answers, but never once did his gaze drift to the corner where Agatha sat. "Who can tell me the primary consideration when changing water to air?" he asked. Several hands shot up. Agatha raised hers as well, arching her back slightly to make her pregnant silhouette even more pronounced. She knew perfectly well that he wouldn't call on her, but she enjoyed making him work at ignoring her. "Mr. Blackwood," Professor Wolfbane called, nodding to a serious-faced young man in the front row. She lowered her arm, smiling to herself as she stroked her large stomach. Let him pretend. Let him maintain his careful distance in daylight hours, with students and faculty watching. They both knew what happened when darkness fell and the moon rose full in the night sky. Her werewolf lover would soon be back in her bed, affectionately nuzzling her pregnant stomach and licking her until she screamed. Chapter 2. The autumn sunlight streamed through the tall arched windows of the classroom, casting long golden rectangles across the worn wooden floor. Agatha sat in her customary seat at the back, deliberately taking her time as she chewed on the end of her pencil. She watched with amusement as Professor Wolfbane's cheeks flushed crimson for the third time in the past hour. He was trying so hard to ignore her. His silver eyes swept across the room, acknowledging raised hands, nodding at correct answers, but never once allowing his gaze to drift toward her corner of the classroom. "The Statute of Magical Crimes, Section 23, he said, his voice steady despite the flush rising up his neck, clearly states that any practitioner who manipulates another's magical essence without consent is subject to imprisonment." Agatha smiled to herself, crossing her legs slowly beneath her desk. His jaw tightened ever so slightly, a small victory. This little game of his had irritated her at first, the way he pretended nothing existed between them during daylight hours. But now, she had to admit there was something deliciously exciting about it, the secret they shared, the anticipation that built throughout the day. It made screwing his brains out after dark even more fun. When the bell finally tolled, signaling the end of the lesson, Agatha took her time gathering her things. The younger students rushed out, eager for their afternoon freedom. Professor Wolfbane busied himself with organizing legal scrolls at his desk, careful not to glance up. Agatha stood, smoothing down her skirt before making her way toward the door. As she passed his desk, she lightly trailed her fingertips across the polished wood. "See you later, Professor," she said with a wink. His pencil froze mid-stroke, his fingers trembling ever so slightly. With a satisfied smirk, Agatha sauntered from the classroom, already looking forward to the evening ahead and what pleasures it might bring when he inevitably came crawling to her cabin after dark. Twilight painted the academy grounds in shades of purple and deep blue as Agatha lit the candles in her cabin. The small shed at the edge of the property had become her den of sin, a private sanctuary where she could breathe freely with her werewolf lover. Steam rose from the copper basin she'd placed before the fire. Agatha hummed softly as she dipped a razor into the warm water. She drew the blade up her calf, leaving smooth skin in its wake, making sure that her legs were perfectly shaved before his arrival. After finishing, she moved to the trunk at the foot of her bed, pulling out the academy uniform she'd altered the previous week. She'd taken in the waist just below her breasts, allowing the fabric to flow freely over her pregnant belly. The hemline had been daringly shortened, and the neckline plunged far lower than regulation permitted, showcasing her swollen breasts. Agatha slipped it on, admiring how the fabric clung to her curves. The rounded swell of her stomach strained against the thin fabric. "Professor," she practiced, trying different tones. "Fancy meeting you here." Too casual. "I've been waiting for you, Artemis." Too desperate. She paced the small cabin, trying different poses, leaning against the doorframe, one hand supporting her lower back, while the other rested atop her belly. Sitting at the edge of the bed, legs crossed to emphasize their smoothness, reclining among the pillows, legs spread wide. "I was beginning to think you wouldn't come tonight." She delivered the line with just the right blend of confidence and vulnerability. Outside, the wind picked up, rustling through the trees that surrounded her little sanctuary. Soon the moon would rise, and with it, Professor Wolfbane's other self would emerge. The self he tried so desperately to hide during the day. Agatha moved to the window, peering out into the darkness. He emerged from the shadows of the forest. His silhouette was unmistakable, massive and powerful, nothing like the reserved professor who lectured children during the day. He dashed across the moonlit clearing toward her cabin, silver-streaked dark fur rippling over bulging muscles. His shoulders alone were broader than her doorway, tapering down to a narrow waist and powerful haunches that propelled him forward with frightening speed. Agatha's heart raced, a delicious mixture of fear and desire flooding her veins. No matter how many times she saw his wolf form, the sight of it never failed to take her breath away. She stepped back from the window, positioning herself in the pose she decided was most effective, leaning against the small table, head tilted slightly, exposing the pale column of her throat in silent invitation. She could hear him breathing just outside, deep, rumbling inhalations that sent shivers down her spine. "I know you're there," she called in her sexiest voice. "Aren't you going to come in?" Agatha smiled, counting silently in her head. 1, 2, 3. The door burst open, slamming back against the wall as his enormous werewolf body filled the entrance, silver eyes blazing with hunger. "Hello there," she purred. The werewolf's eyes narrowed as they took in the sight of her, lingering on her altered uniform and the swell of her belly. His nostrils flared, drinking in her scent with a low rumble. Agatha didn't move as he approached, pussy clenching with each predatory step he took toward her. His massive frame dwarfed her petite figure, but they both knew who held all the power. He circled her, fur brushing against her bare legs. Each point of contact sent shivers across her skin. His claws clicked softly against the wooden floor, his tail swishing behind him. When he completed his circle, he sat back on his haunches directly before her, eyes level with hers. "Don't worry, my love." Agatha reached out to stroke the thick fur at his neck. "Your secret is safe with me." Agatha quickly waddled through the academy's main doors. The corridor was bustling with students rushing to their morning lessons, many giving her a wide berth and whispered glances as she passed. She was running late again. Her werewolf lover had left several bite marks on her neck and it had taken a ton of makeup just to conceal them. "Ravenscroft! Ravenscroft!" A high-pitched voice cut through the corridor noise like a knife. Agatha groaned and turned to face its owner. A short 12-year-old boy with flaming red hair bustled toward her. Agatha could never be bothered remembering his name, so she just called him the Ginger One in her mind. His round, freckled face was flushed with indignation. "You missed the autumn equinox ball," he snapped, pointing one short finger angrily in her direction. Agatha rolled her eyes. "Did I? How unfortunate." "It was compulsory attendance," the Ginger One continued, puffing out his chest. He wore a small badge that marked him as a class leader, a position Agatha suspected was nothing more than teachers wanting free help keeping a bunch of kids in line. The headmistress said that all students, including adult learners, were supposed to be there. "I had other plans," Agatha replied, not bothering to hide her amusement. For weeks the halls had been filled with nothing but chatter about the ball. Who was asking who? Which 12-year-old had rejected which other 12-year-old? What color fabric they'd chosen for their handmade suits and dresses? The teenage drama had been exhausting. "The ball wasn't just a party," he screeched. "It's when they do the school portrait, a magical recording of every student and teacher that will hang in the Hall of Records for 100 years. Agatha laughed. "Oh no, how will I ever forgive myself?" The truth was, she'd known exactly what she was missing. The choice between spending her evenings standing alone drinking lemonade or in the arms of her werewolf lover had been no choice at all. The Ginger One's face darkened further. "Because of you, they'll have to repaint the entire portrait. Do you have any idea how long that's going to take? It's going to cut into my magical frisbee practice." "I'm sure you'll survive," Agatha said dryly, certain that he'd understand her decision once he was grown up and horny. "Now if you'll excuse me, I'm late for magical languages. This will be reported to the headmistress." "Add it to my file," Agatha called over her shoulder as she continued down the hall, right under mysterious pregnancy and inappropriate hemline. As Agatha continued down the hallway, the sound of frustrated shouting drew her attention. Turning a corner, she came upon a massive mural spanning the entire wall, depicting the autumn equinox ball in exquisite magical detail. An elderly man with a wispy white beard was waving his arms frantically at several floating paintbrushes that darted across the canvas, completely ignoring his commands. "Stop! Stop this instant!" the old man wheezed, his face turning purple. "This entire painting needs to be redone from scratch. One missing student ruins the entire historical record." The brushes continued their work, dipping into floating palettes and making adjustments to the painting. Agatha leaned against the opposite wall, a smug grin spreading across her face as she studied the mural. Every student and teacher from Nightbrook was there, all with giant smiles which looked clearly faked. But then her eyes found Professor Wolfbane, standing tall and dignified at the edge of the faculty group. His silver eyes stared out from the canvas, his posture perfect in his formal attire. Agatha frowned, mentally retracing the events of the previous night. He had been in her bed all evening, his massive body curled protectively around her until the first light of morning had driven him away. Yet there he was in the painting, unmistakably present at an event he couldn't possibly have attended. "Professor Winchett," Agatha called to the elderly painter. "Was Professor Wolfbane at the ball last night?" The old man whirled around, his paintbrush-speckled face contorting with fresh anger. "It's Professor Winchell, you disrespectful girl. And of course he was there, unlike a certain someone. Professor Wolfbane understands the importance of tradition and responsibility." He advanced on her, trembling with indignation. "If you weren't such a danger to society with those uncontrolled powers of yours, I would have had you expelled months ago. Months! Your disregard for Academy rules is... Agatha didn't wait to hear the rest of Professor Winchell's rant. She spun on her heel and hurried away, her mind reeling with impossible questions. If Artemis had been at the ball all evening, supervising students and posing for the magical portrait, then who had been in her bed? The corridors seemed to stretch endlessly as she made her way toward Professor Wolfbane's office. She found his door ajar, warm lamplight spilling into the hallway. Without knocking, she pushed it open. Professor Wolfbane sat at his desk, silver-streaked hair falling across his forehead as he graded papers. He looked up, his expression shifting from surprise to that careful professional mask he always wore around her. "Miss Ravenscroft," he said evenly. "Is there something I can help you with? Were you really at the ball last night?" He set down his pencil, brow furrowing. "Yes, of course, as were everyone else. Your absence was noted." "But that's impossible." Agatha closed the door behind her. "You were with me last night." Professor Wolfbane stared at her for a long moment, but then he sighed deeply, removing his spectacles to pinch the bridge of his nose. "Miss Ravenscroft," he said carefully, "I'm concerned about your well-being. I've heard that pregnancy can make women delusional at times. Perhaps the stress of your situation." "Stop lying," she snapped, her hands protectively cradling her belly. "Every full moon for months you've come to my cabin. You can't deny it." "I most certainly can deny it," he replied, his voice hardening. "I have never been to your cabin, not once." No, she thought to herself, freezing in horror. There was no way. It had to be him. Professor Wolfbane's expression softened as he observed Agatha's distress. He rose from his desk and approached cautiously. "Miss Ravenscroft," he said more gently, "I'm truly concerned for your condition. Perhaps you should see Healer Hawthorne. These delusions you're experiencing, they're not healthy." Agatha almost believed him, until she looked down at her stomach, feeling the very real and alive baby move within. They weren't delusions. They were real. "I understand this has been a difficult transition for you," he sighed. "Being uprooted from your life at 36, forced to attend an academy with students half your age. It would be a tremendous strain on anyone's mental well-being." Agatha's mind raced as she stared at him. If it wasn't Artemis in her bed each full moon, then who, or what, had she been inviting into her cabin? Who had fathered the child growing inside her? "Are there," she nervously swallowed, "any other werewolves around here?" Professor Wolfbane's face darkened as he looked toward the window. "There is one," he said gravely. "Corvus Nightstalker, a black magic user who was banished to the Darkwood Forest nearly a decade ago." Agatha's heart skipped a beat. Banished? Why? Corvus was brilliant but dangerous, power-hungry in ways that threatened us all. He believed werewolves were destined to rule over magical society, over all societies. He paced slowly by the bookshelf, running his fingers along the leather-bound spines. He attempted a forbidden ritual that would have made him the Alpha Supreme, the king of all magical beings. The headmistress managed to stop him before the ritual was complete, but not without losses. 3 staff members perished in the battle. Rather than risk trying to capture him, they bound Corvus to the forest with ancient boundary magic. Agatha felt the blood drain from her face. Her visitor couldn't possibly be. A hysterical laugh bubbled up from her throat. "You know what? You're absolutely right, Professor." The words tumbled out faster than she could control them. "These pregnancy hormones are clearly driving me mad. It's just the stress, Being 36 and stuck here with teenagers, having my magic manifest so late, and then getting pregnant. She waved her hand dismissively, forcing a smile that felt more like a grimace. The baby's father, a perfectly normal non-werewolf man I met at a pub, he's gone completely MIA on me. Ghosted. Poof! Typical, right? Miss Ravenscroft. No, it's fine. She backed toward the door. You've made everything perfectly clear. All delusions. My poor, confused, pregnant brain making up fantasies about werewolves when the truth is so much more mundane and embarrassing. Her hand found the doorknob behind her. I should get some rest. In my perfectly safe, completely werewolf-free cabin. Her laughter echoed in the corridor as she fled, her mind racing with questions she was too terrified to answer. Because deep down, she knew the truth. She had invited a monster into her home, and now she was carrying his child. Chapter 3. Agatha paced her small cabin, her fingers twisting nervously as she tried to control her breathing. Inhale for 4 counts. Hold for 7. Exhale for 8. The technique had helped during her past panic attacks, but now it seemed woefully inadequate against the tidal wave of fear threatening to drown her. No, she muttered, hands cradling her swollen belly. This can't be happening. Professor Wolfbane's words echoed in her mind, playing on an endless loop that intensified her growing terror. Corvus Nightstalker, a black magic user who was banished to the Darkwood Forest nearly a decade ago. The name seemed to hang in the air, pulsing with dark energy. Agatha sank onto her bed, the ancient springs creaking beneath her weight. He attempted a forbidden ritual. 3 staff members perished in the battle. Her hands trembled as she ran them through her disheveled hair. Could it be possible? Had she been inviting a murderous, power-mad werewolf into her bed for months? Was she carrying the child of a monster? No, Agatha whispered, her voice growing firmer. No. Something didn't add up. She replayed her conversation with Professor Wolfbane again, analyzing his expressions, the way he'd refused to meet her eyes when discussing Corvus. And then, like lightning striking in a clear sky, realization dawned. Agatha let out a laugh. You clever man. She gasped for breath. It's all part of your game, isn't it? It made perfect sense now. Professor Wolfbane couldn't openly admit to their relationship on academy grounds. This was simply part of the game they'd been playing for months. By day, the proper, untouchable professor. By night, her wild, insatiable werewolf lover. She had simply backed him into a corner in public, so he'd had no choice but to construct that silly story about a banished werewolf. He can't openly acknowledge that the baby is his, she murmured, stroking her belly with newfound confidence. Not without risking his position, his reputation. Relief flooded through her as pieces fell into place. Of course it was Artemis who visited her cabin. Of course it was Artemis who had fathered her child. The alternative was too absurd, too horrifying to contemplate. Corvus Nightstalker, she snorted. What kind of ridiculous villain name is that anyway? Agatha stood, her panic replaced by giddy anticipation. Tonight was still a full moon. Artemis, not some imaginary forest criminal, would come to her again. And this time, she'd make sure he understood that his little game wasn't fooling her at all. But first, she decided with a sly smile, she would play along with his charade one last time. Let him believe his deception was still working. Let him believe she still believed in this imaginary evil werewolf. And then, when the moment was right, she would confront him with the truth. She would expose him, force him to admit what they both already knew. Darkness fell over the academy grounds as Agatha waited by the window, watching for his arrival. When the first howl echoed through the night, her heart quickened its pace. He emerged from the shadows of the forest, silver-streaked fur gleaming in the moonlight. "You're going down, Professor." Afterward, as they lay tangled together in the aftermath of their passion, Agatha traced patterns through his silver-streaked fur with lazy fingers. "You can drop the act now," she said. "I know it's you." The werewolf went still beneath her touch. "I figured it all out." She sat up to look him directly in the eyes. "Why you pretend not to know me during the day? Why you invented that ridiculous story about some evil werewolf called Corvus Nightstalker?" She smiled, stroking his muzzle affectionately. "Your position at the academy, your reputation. I understand why you need to maintain this charade." The werewolf remained frozen, silver eyes unblinking as they stared back at her. "But you don't need to pretend with me anymore. Not here, not now." She took a deep breath. Show me your human form. I want to see your real face." For a long, tense moment, nothing happened. Then slowly, the werewolf rose from the bed, towering over her as he began to shift. Bones cracking and realigning, fur receding into skin. When it was complete, a man stood before her, tall, powerfully built, with dark hair streaked with silver that fell past his shoulders. But it wasn't Professor Wolfbane's face that stared back at her. This man's features were striking, devastatingly handsome in a dangerous way that made her breath catch. A jagged scar ran from his temple to his jaw, only enhancing rather than marring his beauty. His eyes, still the same silver as in his wolf form, held none of the professor's restraint. Instead, they gleamed with something wild, something sensual, something darkly magnetic. Agatha couldn't speak, couldn't breathe, couldn't process the reality standing before her. "You're not?" she finally managed to choke out. "Artemis?" The man chuckled, the sound rich and intimate. "No, my love, but you know who I am." He moved toward her with the fluid grace of a predator, completely at ease in his nakedness. "The same man who's been coming to your bed for months now. The same man whose child you're carrying." The room seemed to spin around her. But that's impossible. You can't be." "Corvus Nightstalker?" His smile widened as he settled beside her on the bed, his body radiating heat. "The very same, sweetheart." He reached out, tucking a strand of hair behind her ear. "Though I must say, I'm intrigued by this game you're playing. Calling me by another man's name?" He clicked his tongue in mock disapproval. "Kinky." "No." Agatha shook her head, one hand moving protectively to her belly as she scrambled backward. "No, this isn't possible. You're not real. You're a story Professor Wolfbane made up to." Corvus's amusement faded, replaced by a flash of something darker before his expression smoothed once more. "How interesting. And here I thought our relationship was exclusive." He moved closer, his hand finding her ankle and sliding up her calf. "Have you been spending time with the good professor, darling? discussing me behind my back. His touch was exactly as she remembered from all their nights together. Warm, confident, knowing exactly how to make her respond. But now it sent ice through her veins. "Don't touch me," she whispered, pulling away. Hurt flashed across his face, so genuine that for a moment, Agatha almost apologized. "Agatha, love," he said, his voice gentler. "What's wrong? What has Wolfbane been telling you?" He said you were banished to Darkwood Forest, that you tried to perform some dark ritual to rule over all magical beings, that people died." Corvus sighed, running a hand through his hair. "Well, he's not wrong about the banishment, though I'd call it imprisonment rather than exile. And for the rest," he shrugged, "politics, darling. History written by the victors and all that." "You're admitting it's true?" Agatha gasped. "I'm admitting there was a disagreement about the natural order of things," he corrected smoothly, "about who should rightfully rule the magical world." His eyes gleamed, and Agatha knew that he didn't feel an ounce of guilt over what he'd done. "I don't understand," she whispered. "How is this possible? How have you been coming here, outside the forest boundaries?" "The boundaries?" Corvus laughed. "Magic, like anything, has its weakness. I've spent years working on that particular spell, testing its limits, finding its faults." His eyes gleamed with pride. "I discovered that on the full moon, when my power is at its peak, I could push just far enough to reach this little cabin at the edge of the grounds. Not much further, mind you. Not yet." He smiled, his hand sliding over her swollen belly with possessive tenderness. "And then you arrived, so different from everyone else here. A grown woman with untapped power. Magical abilities manifesting decades later than usual." His voice dropped to a sensual purr. "Do you have any idea how rare that is? How special? From the moment I sensed your magic, I knew we were meant to find each other." Despite her fear, Agatha couldn't help but respond to the genuine admiration in his voice. It had been years since anyone had made her feel special. "The first night you left your window open," Corvus continued, his expression softening with the memory. "I thought I was dreaming. Your scent called to me. Wild honey and storm clouds. I couldn't have stayed away if I tried." "I thought you were—" "Artemis, yes. I gathered that now." He raised an eyebrow. "A case of mistaken identity that worked rather well in my favor. Wouldn't you say?" His fingers traced lazy circles on her belly. "Though I'm not sure how you confused us. Artemis has always been rather controlled. Repressed, one might say. While I—" His hand slid higher, fingers splaying just beneath her breast. "Well, we both know I'm anything but restrained." Agatha remained motionless in Corvus's embrace, her body frozen with shock as the notorious werewolf cradled her against his chest. Her mind struggled to process the revelation. The lover she had welcomed for months was not Professor Wolfbane, but a banished dark magic criminal. He nuzzled her hair affectionately. "I'm so close now, so close to breaking through completely." He pressed his lips to her forehead. "Just a little longer, and I'll be free of that prison forever." Agatha finally found her voice. "How?" "I have my methods," he said vaguely, his fingers tracing idle patterns on her belly. "Ancient magic the Academy elders have conveniently forgotten or forbidden. Spells they deemed too dangerous for their precious students." The word sent a chill down Agatha's spine. What matters is that soon, very soon, we won't be limited to the full moon. His expression held a disturbing mixture of genuine adoration and manic intensity. We'll be together properly. You, me, and our precious child. But the Academy will be the first to fall. Those pompous fossils who dared to stifle my greatness. His lips curled in disgust before his expression softened again as he gazed at her. They had no idea what they were doing when they admitted you. That you would become so precious to the monster they'd locked away. He laughed softly, the sound both joyful and slightly unhinged. Their arrogance will be their undoing. Agatha's eyes widened, too shocked to form words. Our child will grow up in a new world. He gently ran his fingers through her hair. A world where werewolves will take their rightful place. He pressed soft kisses to her hair, her temple, the curve of her cheek. And you, my love, will stand beside me through it all. No more hiding in this tiny cabin. No more being treated as an oddity because your powers came late. Agatha remained silent, her mind racing as he continued to hold her, continued to whisper endearments against her skin. I know you're frightened now, Corvus said softly. Change is always frightening. But I would never harm you, Agatha. Never. His voice dropped to a fervent whisper. You and our child are everything to me. The future I never dared to dream of having. The honesty in his voice made her shiver. The psycho was clearly in love with her. As Corvus continued murmuring promises against her skin, promises of love intertwined with vague hints at his plans for domination and revenge, Agatha stared past him at the moon hanging low in the night sky, mind racing. The Academy was in danger. The magical world was in danger. She needed to find a way to save them all from the father of her baby.
Thank you for listening to Chapter 1 to 3 of Bred by my werewolf professor. Read the rest of the story, including all the spicy scenes, on Amazon, Kindle, Kindle Unlimited, and in paperback. Full audiobook available at Audible and other audiobook retailers. Find more spicy stories and free ebooks at beatrixsteam.com.